One of my patrons, Johnny Himes, writes, "Dear Professor Dungeon Master, I've been wondering how mapping the dungeon became such a staple of D&D. Isn't it disruptive to role-playing? And how do you handle directions? Is it east and west or left and right? Most dungeons, like your Caves of Carnage, are only 4 to 5 rooms, so is mapping really necessary? How do you do it? What's your thinking, Professor?" Well, that's a great question, Johnny, and sometimes the OSR ways are best, and a map can really add to the game. Believe it or not, it could actually make the game more tense and exciting, but other times, a map just isn't necessary. I recently ran 2 games, one where I had the player's map and one where I didn't, and I'm going to talk about both today on Dungeon Craft.
Deathbringer here. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on any cool content.
So to map or not to map? That's the question we're answering today. So the first part of your query, Johnny, has to do about early D&D. Now, early D&D was about exploration and resource management. This was a game where your character only had 3 or 5 hit points, and if you didn't bring enough torches or rope, it could mean life and death. In 5e D&D, most characters have like 10 hit points or more on first level, and just about everyone can see in the dark, so mapping is less of a priority. There was definitely also a split in the 80s once Dragonlance and Ravenloft came along, and like the Tracy Hickman designed games. Those games really opened up the community, the idea that we could tell different types of stories, not just dungeon exploration stories, but epic quests in the vein of Lord of the Rings. So mapping kind of fell out of favor, but there are circumstances where mapping can be a really cool and integral part of the game. So I recently ran 2 games, one for a bunch of newbies, one for my experienced players, and one used a map and one didn't. So I'm going to talk about those today. So for my newbie game, I had 3 new players. One had played the game before, but the other 2 had never played before, and I ran the Caves of Chaos, aka the Caves of Carnage, from the Keep on the Borderlands, and they went into Cave A, the Kobold Lair. Now, when I first described it, I said the cave entrance is in the north face of the cliff, because they're outside, so they could see the direction of the sun, and they proceed forward about 40 feet, and they reach a T intersection. I say, at this point, you can go left or right. And the mapper asked, "Is the right to the east?" And I replied, yes. So they decided to go east. They go about 90 feet. They reach another intersection. They can go straight or make a left. Now, it's that point that I stopped giving the east, west, north, south directions, and I just reverted to left and right because the players are underground, and that's all they would know. And at that point, they stopped asking for the north, south directions, and I just reverted to left and right because that's what you'd experience if you were in a dungeon. You wouldn't know the direction you were necessarily heading in. And mapping works in a synergistic way with a number of old school tropes, including torches. The characters could not see in the dark. Now, I have a personal problem with 5e, all the characters seeing in the dark. You could check over here or in the links below, and I rant about why I don't allow elves or dwarves or anyone else to have dark vision. Part of it is that you don't have to deal with resource management, but in this case, the players had to light torches in order to see. And that means the torches have fuel and they're going to run out. Now, I learned from Lindy Beige's videos that a real torch burns for about 10 to 30 minutes. So whenever a player character lights a torch in my game, I toss a 6-sided die, and on a 1 or a 2, it burns for 10 minutes. On a 3 or a 4, it's 20 minutes, and a 5 or a 6, it's 30 minutes. So the characters, they go exploring the dungeon, and they go through several rooms. They end up in a fight against the Kobold King. They manage to kill him. They're down to just a couple of hit points, and we don't play with death saves. If you hit 0, you just die, right? So there's no, we're popping up again with healing word or anything like that. Then they ask the critical question: can we search the room for hidden treasure? But I warn him, here's the thing, your torches may only burn for a total of 20 minutes. You need at least that amount of time to get out of the caves. And they said, that's okay, we're going to push it. And in fact, they did find the treasure, and now they're trying to drag out a treasure chest. They're on their last torch, and they reach an intersection, and this is the critical decision. I say, do you want to make a left or a right? Now, I know, to the left, it's the west. They're going to go into the Kobold Common room, where there's about 37 kobolds ready to kill them. Remember, they only have 1 or 2 hit points left. and the other direction, right, leads to the only way out of the dungeon. So this is where mapping becomes critical. There was a tense pause and they thought about it, and then they said, we go right, and they chose the right direction, and they get out into the sunlight just as their torch sputters out, to tremendous cheers, and it was a really tense moment. And the most cool thing about this decision is they only lived because they made the right decision. They themselves, the players. It's not like they just looked on their character sheet and said, no problem, I've got dark vision, or I can cast light at will. That wasn't a possibility here. They didn't have those spells or those resources. So they lived because they were good players. Their character sheet didn't save them. In another more recent game, my experienced players are playing mid-level characters, and they're being pursued by an evil warlord and his small army. And they decide to take refuge and make a last stand in a ruined castle. So they decided to lure this army in and split them up, where they're going to ambush them in different rooms. Now, this scenario is not about exploration. It's about defense of an area that they already control. They would have plenty of time to search every nook and cranny and figure out where and how to set up their traps. So it's not necessary to make a map. I didn't even make a map for my own use. We just did it abstractly. I set up my ultimate dungeon terrain in the center with some pieces of scattered terrain, and I just said, plop your figures down anywhere on the terrain you want near your seat. So in this case, mapping is not only unnecessary, it's suboptimal because it's going to slow the game down to a crawl. So there you go, Johnny. Sometimes I use maps and sometimes I don't. It's a question of knowing when to use that tool in your toolbox. At least that's what I think. What do you think? Please share your ideas with mapping in the comments section below. Also below you'll find links to DungeonCraft on Facebook and Patreon, where you can see this scenario I just described called Causa Mortis. I have a planning session and some live play sessions. And there's also a link below to my module Frankenstein, available at questgivers.com. But don't go away, we have a lot more DungeonCraft content coming up, including this video where I rant about why I hate dark vision. I'll see you soon. May all your rolls be 20s.
Deathbringer again. I have a dwarf buddy who always helps me out with the maps, pointing out all the little symbols and what they mean. The guy is a legend. Now get my t-shirt and watch more DungeonCraft.